Hi, everybody, and welcome to Healing the Divide, Visualizing a Lead-Free Environment, How Art Intersects with Community Activism. My name is Leila McDowell. I'm with the Eisenhower Foundation. I've also been a journalist and a communication strategist for many, many years. We're very excited to hold this important discussion in looking at how 50 years after the Kerner Commission, we can look at how art can be part of movements to develop the new will that we need to heal the divide and bring forth the kind of policies that we need to reduce and ultimately end and eliminate racial inequality, racial injustice, and poverty. And we have a very esteemed panel with us today. And I want to send a very special thank you to Expo for putting this esteemed panel together. I'm very excited about this powerful conversation that is going to ensue. I know that you are as well. And I want to say thank you to, of course, the Mellon Foundation that has also made this possible. So I want to let you know who we have on the panel, and then we'll begin with some opening remarks about the Kerner Commission and the basic framing for this entire panel. So I'm not sure if people want me to read the entire bios, but I can certainly do that because the people that we have on this panel have done so much incredible work in this space. We have Mel Chin, who was born in Houston, Texas. He's known for a broad range of approaches in his art, including works that require multi-disciplinary, collaborative teamwork, and works that enlist science as an aesthetic component to developing very complex ideas. You probably know he created and implemented Revival Field back in 1990, which was a project that was a pioneer in the field of green remediation, the use of plants to remove toxic heavy metals from our environment. He formed the collective, the Gala Committee, that produced In the Name of the Place, a public art project conducted on American primetime television. He's one of the artists featured in the first year of the ongoing PBS series Art of the 21st Century. He is a MacArthur Fellow, and what we will be hearing a lot more about today is his work in creating a lead-free environment in our communities, which as part of that divide have been so disproportionately impacted by toxins, environmental racism. Lead is an example of that. So we're very excited that he's joining us. We also have Cheryl with us, and Cheryl has also done some really powerful, pioneering work. Cheryl Johnson, she's a longtime resident of Outgill Gardens, which is a public housing development located on the far south side of the Chi of Chicago. She's a mother of two, a grandmother. She is the daughter of the late Hazel Johnson, mother of environmental justice, who founded People for Community Recovery over 42 years ago. And now she has taken the reign and is powerfully fighting for environmental justice and equality in Chicago. So we really applaud your work, Cheryl. We're so excited that you are here with us. And she has been appointed, she has worked with the governor, Pat Quinn. She has worked with the council and many leaders to bring environmental justice and fight for environmental justice in the communities of Chicago, who, like many Black and brown communities, are disproportionately impacted by environmental racism. And we have Devon VanHouten-Maldonado, Director of Programs at SkyART. It is a very important nonprofit that provides free art programs and art therapy for youth on Chicago's South Side. And we all know how effective art can be, and he is wielding that as a tool in the struggle for social change in our country and healing individuals and peoples. He first began doing art programs with incarcerated youth back in 2010 before moving to Mexico City and working as a journalist until 2018. And now we're so glad to have you back here, lending your magic and your work to our impoverished youth here on Chicago's South Side. And of course, we have Alan Curtis, who is the president and the CEO of the Eisenhower Foundation. He'll tell you more about the foundation, but it is the private sector continuation of the Kerner Commission. So without further ado, Alan, we'd love to hear from you about the Kerner Commission and basically the framing for why we are even having this important discussion.
Thank you to Expo Chicago for hosting, Leila for moderating, Caden Tracy for planning, to our distinguished panelists, and to the Mellon Foundation. At a Smithsonian at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, the National Museum of African American History and Culture's current exhibition titled Reckoning, Protest, Defiance, Resilience features a portrait of Breonna Taylor by Amy Sherald, who painted the official portrait of Michelle Obama. The Breonna Taylor painting is a powerful, elegant, and psychologically direct statement on reckoning in America. It is also about Black Lives Matter and 2020 and George Floyd. The painting's meaning carries America back as well to the disturbances of the 1960s in Detroit, in Newark, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in Washington, and 150 other cities across the nation. In response to the 60s protests, President Lyndon Johnson formed the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. It was bipartisan. It was called the Kerner Commission after its chair, then Governor Otto Kerner of Illinois. Most of the members of the Kerner Commission were privileged white men who bore the imprimatur of the political establishment. Nonetheless, a majority of Kerner commissioners concluded in 1968 that the underlying cause of the protest was white racism, quote unquote. The commission concluded it is time to make good the promises of American democracy to all citizens, urban and rural, Black and white, Spanish surname, American Indian, and every minority group, to quote directly. Today, it is still time to make good the promises of democracy for all Americans. In Healing Our Divided Society, the Eisenhower Foundation's 50-year update of the Kerner Commission, we concluded that America has made relatively little progress in reducing racial injustice, economic inequality, and poverty, and in many ways we have gone backwards. Since the Kerner Commission, deep poverty, income inequality, wealth inequality, public school segregation, and mass incarceration of people of color has increased. White nationalist movements have strengthened, as we saw in Charlottesville. The Capitol building in Washington was invaded on January 6th. The pandemic has made things disproportionately worse for people of color and the truly disadvantaged. Nonetheless, over the last 50 years, the nation has built up considerable evidence on policies that work. And I know how important evidence is to our panel members tonight. Living wage investments in average citizens work. The Affordable Health Care Act and vaccination work. Head Start and equity in public school finance work. Community-based crime prevention by grassroots nonprofit organizations assisted by carefully trained police work. Housing mobility models work and can lead to school integration. Yet as we have talked with people across the nation on Kerner and healing, we have found the public does not, for the most part, understand that we know a lot about what works and that policy needs to be based on evidence and science, not on dogma and supposition. We also have learned a great deal about what doesn't work, like zero tolerance policing, mass incarceration of people of color, and willful indifference to the unequal distribution of prosperity. Most of all, what doesn't work includes false 1980s rhetoric on government being the problem. Contrary to that rhetoric, we need to continue advocating for a more activist public sector that recognizes healing and Kerner priorities, I suggest to you. It is really time to seize the day, renegotiate the social contract, restructure basic power equations, and change the rules of the game. The goal is not to get back to normal. Normal has been the problem in America. We have, in fact, already reversed the false 1980s rhetoric on government. 2020 hosted the largest expansion of federal financed activity in American history. And with the infrastructure legislation just passed, the momentum continues in 2021. Relevant to our convening tonight, that infrastructure legislation includes, of course, unprecedented funding to replace toxic lead pipes that are contaminating our drinking water. Yet in order to fully seize the day, to scale up what works and to scale down what doesn't work, we still need what the Kerner Commission called new will from the American people. What is the use of evidence in our deeply threatened democracy if there is no will to take action? How then can we create new will in our divided society? That is one of the most important questions of our time. We can begin to create new will with, for example, the infrastructure legislation just passed, with the voting rights legislation that needs to be passed, with the education, family, anti-poverty, and climate legislation that is now being debated in Congress. These are all important. But some also say that generating new will can, in part, be a function of the humanities, the visual arts, the performing arts, museums, and higher learning institutions. And that is our theme tonight. Martin Luther King, Dolores Huerta, John Lewis, and Cesar Chavez created cultural change in the 1960s, change that was facilitated, visualized, and amplified by the museums and other cultural institutions, by the visual arts, and by the performing arts. That cultural change helped influence public sector legislation, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. In turn, that legislation created more cultural change and more legislation. Culture impacts policy, and policy impacts culture. To better define how culture can impact policy, we are collaborating on panels like tonight's with visionaries in the arts and the humanities. What questions are we asking our panels? Most importantly, we are asking whether there can be a cause and effect strategy in which the visual arts, museums, and the performing arts can better visualize, amplify, and facilitate Kerner and healing priorities. Can such a strategy create new will? And can that new will then lead to measurable reductions in racial injustice, economic inequity, and poverty? During our panels, it is important to share narratives of success for how the arts positively impact policy, as we will do tonight. But we are pushing the envelope for more, for how systemically the arts can do better in the future, and for how we can document positive cause and effect outcomes. To help frame tonight's convening, let me share an event we recently undertook with the directors of the Smithsonian African American, Latinx, Native American, Asian Pacific, American History, and Women's Museums. We asked the Smithsonian directors whether they thought it was important for leading art and cultural museums to seize the day, as we have urged. We asked the directors about the current Smithsonian Breonna Taylor exhibition on racial reckoning. We inquired whether young people from the south side of Chicago, from South Central LA, from the South Bronx would in fact come to see the exhibition. Most, of course, will not make the trip to the Smithsonian in DC. We asked the Smithsonian directors, does that mean the Breonna Taylor portrait and the exhibition must be more carefully projected on the Smithsonian website? And what is the role of our deeply imperfect social media? We asked whether the Smithsonian needs to focus on how local and smaller museums across the nation can attract people at least as well as large national museums. Just as Dr. King was assembling a coalition among all races and classes before he was assassinated in 1968, we asked the Smithsonian directors about the need to communicate to multiple audiences. So, for example, we need to communicate to believers how to better visualize Kerner and healing priorities, help motivate them to continue the movement. But importantly, we also need to communicate to independents and people undecided, as well as to Americans who may be opposed to Kerner and healing priorities, like some whites living in poverty, and like the state legislators who have passed voter suppression laws. In response to these questions, the Smithsonian directors felt it was important for national cultural institutions to spend considerable resources to seize the day and generate new will. They said, we really have no choice but to be activists and to be engaged at the Smithsonian. One director invoked Dr. King's iconic 1963 letter from Birmingham jail, in which he wrote that more than slow and incremental change was needed. Dr. King eloquently argued that whereas the ill will of rabid segregationists was out in the open and therefore could be combated in the 60s, the shallow understanding of mildly supportive people threatened to reinforce acceptance of the comfortable status quo. Another Smithsonian director pointed to how Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign march in Washington to Washington in 1968 seized the day and included a diversity of poor African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and whites demanding an economic Bill of Rights that addressed not only racial injustice, but also economic inequity and poverty. The Smithsonian directors reaffirmed the need today for multicultural alliances of all races, classes, and walks of life, though we did not have time in this event to discuss how to also engage people opposed to Kerner and healing priorities. And the Smithsonian directors pointed out that there are more local museums than Starbucks and McDonald's across America. They underscored the need to strengthen and energize local, grassroots, and neighborhood-focused museums and art institutions to create new will. That grassroots energy and that community activism is what Expo Chicago is all about, and what you, our panelists, are all about. So I challenge our panelists on new will, on multiple audiences, and on the integration of science with the emotional resonance of lived experience. And I challenge our audience to respect what Mel said to Mellon Foundation President Elizabeth Alexander last month at a webinar on how the humanities can save humanity. Mel confessed that his generation tried to save the world in the 1960s and that he is still trying. As a member of Mel's generation, I confess the same to you tonight. Thank you, and now I look forward to Cheryl's presentation.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to be here to talk about something that I've been passionate about, working with people for community recovery when I first started. I've always been involved with the organization since its inception, but I came employed about 35 years ago. And one of my major projects was to deal with lead-based paint in my community. And learning about it and doing my own personal research, I learned that this was one of the most preventable illness or disease that any children can be exposed to, and particularly around lead-based paint. And learning about it, that mostly all houses that was built before 1978 has the potential of having environmental lead hazards. But we also know that any houses that was built before 1963 definitely have environmental lead hazards in it. And considering that Altgeld Gardens, where I live, was built in the 40s, in 1944. And the response and what's unfortunate about my neighborhood, it is built on a liquid toxic waste dump back from the operation of George M. Poorman of the 1860s, when he operated a sewage farm in our area. And the drainage ditches came through here from making the railroad cars back then, which consists of a lot of metals that was deposited into our soil. So we have a high percentage of people living in our community that lives in poverty per capita income in my community. We currently is a food desert, and we are desert in all ways when it comes to food, pharmacy, banking, transportation, health. It just seemed like the city of Chicago has decided to ignore our community. And when my mother founded People for Community Recovery in 1979, and that's all because she heard that the South Side of Chicago has a higher incidence of cancer than any other area in the city of Chicago, and she wanted to know why. And it was based on our zip code at that particular time. So from our own personal research, she was able to document that we have 50 documented landfills in our area, 250 leaking underground storage tanks, and over 350 hazardous waste facilities that manage waste, store chemicals, or manufacture chemicals. You go to the next slide, please. And she enabled our community to Toxic Donut. As you can see, that in the center of this graph here that is being presented, that's where I live, Allgale Gardens. And as you can see outside, the perimeters based on 1-2 kilometer buffers, you can see what type of hazardous waste that we have. I mean, why she called my community a Toxic Donut. You see a sewage treatment plant, you see a steel mill, you see lots of illegal dumping, not only on the land, but you also see it on the soil. We live on one of the busiest highway, Bishop Ford Express 94, where anytime there could be an accident or in our area. And you can also look at, we in the Lake Calumet area, and when there's always a leak or spill or some form of accident in our community. And as you can see, I show 2 different types of landfills that is in our community, CID and the Land and Lakes landfill. And most importantly, our community was very instrumental in getting the Chicago Housing Authority to clean up PCB that was buried in the ground in our community for over nearly 30 years. Next slide, please. And as a result of the Toxic Donut, we have learned that we have the highest infant mortality rate in the city, the county, and the state. We have a high low birth rate based on these cities. But when you look at cancer and diabetes in our community, it's still higher than the national norm for the state and the county and the city. So we're saying, and particularly when you're talking about lead poisoning, when I first started with lead poisoning campaign, that at that particular time, the city's health department would not respond unless a child lead level was above 50 deciliter per liter of blood, and that was very detrimental. Today, we're under 5 deciliter microdesma, I can't say it right, per liter of blood. But lead has no purpose in our health. It deteriorates our kids, and we know that at 5 and below, it causes learning disability. So and I don't have any statistics about the exposure rate, because one of the things that I learned, that most of the public housing that was built in the city of Chicago was built during this time period. And about in the 90s, there was a high elevation of children, particularly in Robert Taylor, that had a high incidence of cancer, lead poisoning than any other public housing in this city. So what had happened was that the city of Chicago dismantled mostly all these public housing, and many of these kids spread it throughout the city and out of the city and out of the state with high blood lead level that went undetected. So we know that it manifests into behavioral problems, learning disability, chronic exposure, create all kind of different kind of health issues. So you can go to the next page, please. So our common exposure to lead exposures, lead exposure. We know that with the household paint. And you could definitely talk about the soil, because right now we didn't change until the middle 80s from leaded gas to unleaded gas, but it deposited into our soil. We knew when we was advocating, had our campaign for lead in our water, particularly in our public school system, but we didn't have the political will, the political power to affect change, because we knew that many of the fountains in the school, and particularly in my community, the George Washington Carver school complex, that lead was detected in our water. So when you think about lead exposures, also cause all kinds, we still have it, especially we use it in paint, we use it in commercial paint, where when you see a lot of the yellow signs, red signs, the fire hydrants, all those things is painted with commercial lead. So when you talk about ammunition, when you talking about, that's commercial lead, and amenities, anyone gets shot, if they can't remove that bullet, then their body, that bullet is leaching out into their system. And so we have to do something in regards to try to save our community, because once lead deposit into the bone marrow, it's irreversible. You cannot change it. So it's important that we're trying to eliminate lead from our everyday uses, because the long-term exposure with our children in particular is detrimental, right? So when you look at today, and you look at the arts can play a major role in educating communities like mine. Performing arts, visual arts can play a major role, because it's part of our environment. That is our movement, to educate our community, to reduce the amount of lead and the lead exposures that we have in many houses that been built before 1978 and 1963. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, how does it affect the body? It affects our children and the adults. What's in our body and the adults, from the work industry in particular, where Argyle Gardens is situated at. We're in the Lake Calumet district area, as I said earlier, and it was the operation of the steel mills in our area, the coke ovens, the byproducts from those operations really exposed many adults who was lead poisoned, didn't even know they was lead poisoned, and they come up with a lot of different health related as they got older. We know that if women is pregnant and they have high lead level, they can pass that on to their unborn child. So it's important for us to be able to use whatever mechanism, whatever visual, whatever voices in the performing art, it can really play a role in the education and the awareness, rather the awareness than the education, how to reduce our exposures to lead sources that is in our environment.
Cheryl, thank you so very, very, very much. That was a powerful example of exactly how injustice impacts our community. And I think that when we move over to Mel, he'll be able to talk about a lot of the way that art has been integrated in a movement to change that and create new will. We only have about 30 minutes left for this, so I just wanted to move it along, if that's okay.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you. And I am giving you a standing ovation right now. And you talked about how there was a lack of will to accomplish one policy, but you were able to develop the will to accomplish another, the removal of the PCPs from the environment. That is incredible work. And so standing ovation to that.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Cheryl, because when I'm going to show some things you can run through these pieces. I mean, sometimes I'm looking at these works, just a sampling. It's not my work all the way. It is working with others, sometimes with scientists to maximize or visualize what they're up to in order to make it at least stimulate the desire to understand. I think that's important where art can fit. And we just keep going through these slides, it's all Coolio, because you got kids. It's just like a portrait of the Atlantic Pacific Ocean. Then there's Flint Fit. And when we didn't go there to deal with the lead pipes, but we went there to get the community's approval so we could work on a fashion situation. So we could work with, a major brand there in New York to create product, to bring the economy to it. I love that that was at a basketball station, because Hakeem Olajuwon said the game is won and lost under the boards. And here they are in a fashion show that happened with things that they made. They made out of those bottles. So, but anyway, a product, sometimes you can't get the lead out, but you can do things to provide concepts of hope. And so this is a important thing. When I went down to New Orleans, it was like there to help, and I was stunned. I couldn't do anything. I was not able because I was listening to people and all the stuff they went, the trauma they went through, and the psychological and sociological. They were way beyond what I experienced. It's just a physical damage. But then I kept going back to find out more, and this is where I found the red lead map and went back to the 8th Ward there, where the contamination in front of this yard can be like thousands and thousands of parts per million. And I realized that 30 to 50% of the inner city childhood population in New Orleans were compromised with lead before the storm. So sometimes it's not going down there to address the problem. It's to find out something that's invisible like this, like lead, and to figure out a way where it's not my work, to find a way to, when you say the challenge is to create the will, sometimes it's just, in this case, it's create the value, to create the value of a human voice who can't vote, who's 9 years old, who's being poisoned, whether it's in New Orleans or now we know definitely in Chicago and everywhere else in the country. So this expanded way beyond New Orleans because it had to. It became the Fundred Dollar Bill Project that's still active. And so it's about just drawing. So it's about drawing. So, but it's not just about art. It's about the money. It seems that money is the issue. But then because people respect money for some reason, it seems more than people's health. The idea here is to have it represented, to have a person do one representation, but then it's our job to gather and deliver. So we created like a armored truck, Fundred guards, and gathered those voices. Now we have about 500,000 of them, 500,000. We went all over the neighborhoods. So we had to do this. We're driven to do this, no pun intended. But the truck ran out of vegetable oil, and we went to DC, created a Fundred reserve, and the people that cut the ribbon are the people most affected, the kids. So Chicago was very important. This is a collection of about 500,000 of them. Hey, it's in the Brooklyn Museum right now. Everyone who drew one of those bills is in a major museum exhibition, a collection. So, but it's not just about art. It's just not just about, lead contamination. It's about a people's voice and how it can be represented. So we want to go further than just awareness. We want to bring the people that are affected right in front of their legislators, bring them up there and get them together. I think that's a senator. Well, damn, that's a House Speaker, Madam Speaker. But to bring them not just to just meet and not just to bring awareness, but to say their voice matters and to help and say, if these policymakers want something done, we are behind them. That's what the Fundred Dollar Bill Project is about. Because it is about, we're talking about making visual something that is truly invisible. And sometimes it's not just lead that's invisible, it's, the people's voices. So then we got this bill for ill going, and that's our job, deliver and heal. And that's the bill for ill. And this is over at where's that? That's Sweetwater Foundation location. at a New Civics Arts Church. So we did something there, but that's not enough. See, so we put that safe house door, of solid steel version for them that's replicated in the same scale as the one that was in New Orleans to book in this project that's been going on for a dozen years. Now I'm going to say it's not something you just do and walk away from. You know, it's something that you have to have sustained kind of relationship. So this young man's drawing can be represented because he believes, his hope, his belief that he can be relieved of lead poisoning in his time. So that's what drives us. You know, we're driven by these concepts and knowing that maybe awareness is not enough. Maybe we got to challenge that. Maybe you create the conditions for awareness, maybe what we need. We are so divided as a country, maybe we can't even say what we need to say and have it heard. So the idea of artists is working with people. And the idea of artists coming together, we're not the solution, but we want to be part of one. See, I think the idea is knowing and it's not say putting yourself in your place or putting yourself down. It's about gladly understanding that change also comes collectively. And the voices of the people do matter. And the ways you can deliver it can be transformative. And we will continue to do that. And we're still looking forward to collecting many, many more fundreds from the city of Chicago, because this whole project was almost winding down until I saw an article, and Cheryl Johnson's work may have had something to do with it to make us understand this. But it was an article about homicides in the south side of Chicago, a 38% increase, and no one mentioned lead. And I said, you know, I think it's related, and we have to pull it together. So we're there in Illinois hoping for Senator Durbin to help him, actually not help him, haven't asked for him to help us. We want to put our funding behind his bill for lead safe housing for children, for kids. See, so it's an organic process, and you have to keep shifting and modulating and standing up for others. And that's what we're about.
Thank you, Mel. That is a very, I think, salient example of the integration of art and movement and creating new will. Thank you for that. Devon, we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, everyone. What an honor and a privilege to be sharing space with these folks. Thank you, Mel and Cheryl. SkyART is located just a few miles from where Cheryl lives in the South Chicago community. It was founded in 2001 by Sarah Ward, who's an art therapist. And this year is our 20th anniversary, and we're very excited that this year marks our expansion and growth also to the west side of Chicago. We serve about 3,500 children per year through free art programming and art therapy at our South Chicago location, which you can see the studio here, in schools and through community partners, and now at our west side location, which we're very excited about. You could see that here we're doing a social distancing program. We were one of the first organizations to open in July of 2020. So not this summer, but the last summer, basically coming out of lockdown. And we have programs for all ages, ages 7 to 24, including a pre-K program. We have an art therapy program called Project Impact. Our teen program is called Project Third Space, and our program for younger kids is called Skyway. And we really focus on process-based learning. So this work exemplifies that. This is what we call a make your mark painting. So the kids come into our space and they literally make their mark to affirm their presence, to create this break between whatever's going on outside in their lives. And when they come into SkyART and they can feel safe and seen and heard and have their voices matter. So one of the important things that we try to introduce at SkyART, which is also an important tenet of social justice frameworks like critical race theory, is freedom of choice, right? It's not that we only want to meet people's basic needs, but rather that we want to go further and provide them the freedom, the autonomy, the agency to choose what they want to do with their lives. And so we emphasize things like process, like collaboration. This piece here is a collaboration between a lot of young people and teaching artists to create this amazing portrait, which has actually been exhibited in several amazing locations and is part of several nonprofit collections. This is a mural that we just completed this summer in collaboration with Olive Harvey College, the South Chicago location. which is just down the street from SkyART. And so a lot of what we're doing is using art as a way to help kids gain social emotional learning skills. One of the key tenets of social emotional learning is that freedom of choice and reflection. This is a piece that we created with incarcerated youth at a facility here in Chicago. And this is a big piece that's about 8 by 8 feet, where we're essentially letting the youth do with whatever they want to do. So we have to work with the administration there at the prison to let us do things like let the youth gang bang, right? And make their marks on this canvas. And, what we tell the administration is like, well, maybe that's all they know how to draw. So they start with that. And then over time, over, the period of 4 or 5 months, it becomes this amazing canvas. And we're excited that we're going to be exhibiting that next year in partnership with Weinberg Newton Gallery and Arts and Public Life. We also have an organic garden. And so we feed the kids and we meet their basic needs. We teach them about food and where it comes from. And as Cheryl mentioned, in all of these Southside neighborhoods, lead contamination is a big issue. And so we teach them about the environment, how to take care of it, how to grow their own food. We feed all of our teens a healthy meal on Saturday during our teen program, which is an all-day program. And it's interesting when we survey our parents and when we do focus groups with our parents, the food program is one of the most important aspects of our program. So we have parents tell us things like, I was at the grocery store and my child asked me to buy zucchini and I've never had a zucchini before. And so it's funny, sometimes the things that you think are making the biggest impact are surprising. And I wanted to end with this slide, which says, this is by a young woman at SkyART. This is the future is in our hands. Because what I believe and what the work we're doing at SkyART speaks to is the fact that when we put art in people's hands, that's what empowers them, right? So art is powerful in their hands. And I think that's what's so great about Mel's project and other projects like this, where we're empowering them, we're giving them critical thinking skills, we're teaching them to be creative, because it really does take creativity to build these ladders and bridges out of poverty, so that they can have the freedom to choose what they want to do with their lives and where they want to go. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And this is very exciting. I think the meaningful work that all of you have shared represent a very important and critical and crucial example of what we're talking about in terms of the power of art in creating new will to create the kind of policies that were envisioned by the Kerner Commission. So I'd like to start by just opening it up with the two key questions that were raised by Alan in his presentation. And oops, where did I go? There I am. That were raised in his presentation for us to answer. And I just really, really we all look forward to getting your thoughts on those two essential questions. So I'm just going to read them to you so that you have them. And you've probably marinated on them already, so we can't wait to hear what your thoughts are on them. So let me just share those questions with you. I think the first one that we really want to delve into with some depth is looking at if there can be a cause and effect strategy, an actual strategy that leads from artistic innovation. Mel, you've done a lot of that artistic innovation. What you're doing, Devon, particularly with young people, it's like from the macro to the micro in terms of, and the micro to the macro in terms of influence and cultivating new will. Very, very, I thought that was just very innovative and critical, what you were sharing. But the question is, can there be a cause and effect strategy that leads from artistic innovation to measurable cultural change in America? And can that cultural change actually embody new will that then leads to measurable reduction in racial injustice, i.e. environmental injustice is a reflection of that, economic inequality, poverty? And so I'd like to just throw that question out there for your brilliant minds to share some thoughts with us on. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, go ahead. I want to hear Cheryl. Go ahead, Cheryl.
No, actually, when we was advocating for the removal of lead-based paints in all public housing, we came up with a lot of lead reforms that CHA has to abide by, or we was going to sue them. So each public housing had a report card where the environmental lead hazards was able to, that was located in public housing. So that was a visual thing that people was able to see where exactly in their homes where these lead hazards were also. But we also looked at it, you know, from a health perspective, because we really tried to educate the community about how to reduce the risk factors when it comes to having a child being exposed to lead. We know that eating fatty food increase the absorption of lead. So we really emphasize that, yes, a kid can have a hamburger, but instead of frying the hamburger, let's bake the hamburger, as we said as an example. Yes, if you tell a child visually that this potato chips are going to make their stomach hurt, they get that. But we also looked at it at the point that, you know, we are the one that most negatively impacted about it. How can we flip that script? And what we was able to do, we was the first community-based organization in the country to sponsor a lead abatement residential training program for workers. So we was able to get people licensed. They had to be licensed through the state of Illinois Public Health Department. And they went through the 40 hours of training. And then we demanded from CHA that you hire these people to do the abatement, but also to be the lead educators. So that's how we was able to really address lead-related issues in public housing. Not only we looked at it from a health perspective, but we looked at it also from an economic.
And it sounds like you used a strategy of some artistic innovation, like with the report card, to visualize that for people as a way to help them relate, not just to educate them, but also to motivate them. Because in the creation of new will, that's a motivating. And Mel, as you talked about, it's not just education, but it's how do you inspire and motivate to action, to create new will, to push for change. So Mel, your thoughts on that. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was really helpful.
It's just a tall order. You know, I heard the question, and how's art going to do this? So, you know, to change and bring down racial injustice. Sometimes I think the strategy may not be as grand, because the hope has to be extreme and the strategy has to be very measured. And you have to be motivated by looking at all aspects. In other words, it might be, I always talk about, how do you reanimate the desire to want to know? We live in a society so divided, people have their mind, think they have their minds made up. How you don't try to change a mind, how you create a condition where their minds can shift, allow some breathing room to shift. In other words, to me, making art and making actions with people is to have conversations with, like Cheryl, Devon, and let's talk about what is the catalytic structure that can make people change. You know, how do sometimes I get weirdo. I say, how can we help the rich? Because they seem to keep getting the 1%, keeps increasing. Maybe they're the ones that need to be motivated to think about the consequences of this. And how do you go about that? So invert things in order to turn them upside down, to force art and force the creative mind to accept the challenge. So the challenge is greater than just how we get cause and effect. How do you begin to create the in-between, the arc of effect? To me, that I'm motivated by that. So therefore, even the Fundred Project is about, essentially, it doesn't really say lead, but it says a voice and it says money and it says somebody's capital, whose body and mind and hope is worth something, you know? So you start somewhere, but then you make the obligation to gather it and to deliver it. You work to get those 500,000 bills, you know? Those Benjamins, you know, it's all important. You know,
dollar bills.
Oh,
dollar bills, y'all.
The Benjamins. Yeah, I had a 19-year-old friend who drew one when he was 9 in New Orleans. Come to the Senate, and we met with Nancy Pelosi, and he wore. His T-shirt was all about the Benjamins. I swear, that's the first thing she looked at and said, "Hey, I like that."
But you know, art does have power, right? It has power to motivate and inspire. It's a language. Sometimes we can't access the language that we're speaking, or it doesn't inspire us. But sometimes we might see some art that is very specific, that brings the same message, but at the same time makes us say, wow, that's right. That, it touches us at a visceral level sometimes when language touches us at an intellectual level, but that visceral level is sometimes the place that creates action, because it creates that emotion, that rage, that passion. So that's just something that I throw into the mix there. And Devon, I really want to get your thoughts on this. Can there be a cause and effect
Yeah,
strategy that leads to innovation, to measurable change?
Leila, what's interesting and powerful about art is that visceral reaction. Around the turn of the 19th century, with modernity, we started deconstructing the image, and people started to think abstract, right? We started to think about how we can deconstruct our preconceived notions about, not only art, but reality. And so one of the most powerful things that I think we can do, especially as contemporary artists, is begin to introduce that thinking earlier. One of the first things that I like doing with new participants at SkyART is the same thing that happens on your first day of drawing one in art school, which is they say, forget everything you think you know about drawing, right? We're taught from a very young age, and in elementary school and middle school and even earlier, that being a good artist means that you can draw something well or you can paint something well, right? And so we need to explode those ideas. We need to reintroduce creativity into our education curriculums in a way where we're teaching creativity as an asset, and we're not teaching kids to be less creative by checking a box, by meeting, the bare minimum, because we live in a complex world where there's a lot of difficult, converging, overlapping problems, and it's going to require a lot of creativity to meet those problems. And so I think that sort of the artistic mindset of someone who thinks in the intersections of a lot of systems, can think abstractively, can operate through a lot of nuance, can be critical and reimagine the old way of doing things, that is a way that we can move forward, especially if we're introducing that way of thinking into our young people.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Mel, you touched on one of the second questions, which is, can art be a vehicle to reach multiple audiences, including audiences that might be opposed to Kerner Commission policies? And you talked about the very wealthy, the 1%. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I want to circle back to what Devon said about deconstructing. I also deconstructing the mythologies about what it is to be an artist, because we look at the marketing of it, and it creates this personality of the cult of personality. Maybe it's not about that. To free ourselves to move to work, so I could work with Cheryl more closely, or Devon. It becomes like that's not the same territory of the museums and galleries. Even though I shouldn't say that, I'm in the Smart Museum. Be quiet, hush my mouth. But back to the question about your question about can it and will it, and the power and I just believe in options. Creating options that don't exist yet, creating places for languages or feelings that probably have not been explored, and therefore you create a catalytic structure, the in-between, maybe even deconstructing the idea of art as being powerful. Though I know it serves us, but maybe that's not the right word. Maybe to create it not as an ancillary thing, but it's something important in our lives, that maybe it's the people who have trouble accepting things can find a means, if we deconstruct this high and mighty place, so that they can embrace the possibilities of human expression. Then we can have a communication. Sometimes it's just setting up the first part of the situation. Again, I think it's been 50 years since that's happened. And guess what? It's still normal, because it's still the picture of the America that is. And we have to come to grips with it, and we have to talk about not saying exposing what we already know is there, but giving a way out of what's there.
That's right. No, that's fascinating. And I think, by the way, if anybody has any questions who is watching, and we really welcome you and thank you, we want to hear your voice. We've talked today about the importance of empowering voices and raising voices. We certainly want to hear your voice. So in chat, if you have a question, you can put it in chat and we'll make sure that it gets answered. Unfortunately, we only have a few more minutes, but I'd like to get some closing thoughts on two things. One is it's the power of art to reach multiple audiences in the creation of new will. And Mel, you've touched on that. I'd like to hear other folks as well. And then the second thing is, should we be more strategic in thinking about how we use this incredible language of art? And Mel, as you said, it has to be an integral part, and we have to redefine what artist is. But in utilizing the very influential and impactful vehicle and language of art to create a new will as we fight for the priorities that were laid out in the Kerner Commission. Anybody, your thoughts on that, on those two things?
I'll say, Napoleon Bonaparte hired David to make paintings for him about events that didn't transpire. And because he knew that art and images tell stories, and people will use those images to create narratives in their head that they can relate to. And so in the same way, art therapy works, where someone might not have the vocabulary to talk about trauma or experiences that they've been through, but images, colors, shapes, those are a language, as you referred to, Leila. And it's an incredibly powerful language that is visceral, as you spoke about before. And so art is an incredibly powerful tool for communication, especially for those who are not traditionally in the loop when it comes to our dominant systems of communication, right? When it comes to academia, when it comes to politics. So art is a way to empower those communities through this visceral system that we actually don't even understand that well. We don't even understand why we see things the way we see them. We need to challenge why we see things the way we see. And we need to learn to see again. We need to learn to see each other again. We need to teach our kids to see in a new way.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think about, for example, how my kids love manga, which is very visual, but it's a very, there are characters, there are lessons, there are storylines just as compelling as the written word novel. But it's a visual language, and it has a great impact on how they see the world, how they process knowledge, how they think about morality, comic books. So, I think art can take, my thought is that art can take many forms, like what you're doing in your tremendous work, Devon. And can we be more thoughtful, more deliberate, more strategic about it to utilize it and wield it as a weapon in the struggle for the policies that we know we need to reduce racial inequality, really eliminate racial inequality, racial injustice, and poverty?
Yeah, it scares me when you say the word weapon. Maybe I don't want to go there, because I kind of, this idea of measuring success, maybe that's not the dealio. It's like how to create a condition where we collectively hold something, if not a weapon, the will itself, and you create conditions or create climates. That's more of a situation. And it's maybe not thinking about from here to there, and not thinking even in an adversarial sense. I think that the visuality of well, maybe this guy, I think he lost the last election, is still lying about it. That's incredible that people still believe that, right? Well, not to the people that believe in that. See, and what I'm saying that maybe there's a point where what you do can be a part of the relief from having to have these false beliefs. Maybe that's where the healing begins. The healing begins not to create something that absolutely heals, but something that allows it to begin. Now, that's the biggest challenge, is for us to rethink what we do and say, wow, I have to be real about this. Half of the country does not even dig what I'm saying, And so maybe can they dig what we are saying? Then what are we saying? And I think this is turning things around. Again, the great James Baldwin, I always bring him up because he talked about it. He said, your job description, I'm paraphrasing, is to extract the question that is buried in the answers. See, and I believe in that.
That's very powerful. We have a question. Oh, go ahead, Cheryl.
And I just want to say that art allows you the freedom to express yourself. It allowed me to paint a picture of the struggles that I have experienced to create that story and that narrative.
No, that's right. That's right. That's right. We have a question from Madeline. Thank you all for your insights. What ways do you see the micro ways art influence in contrast to the macro? That is a very, very good question. Thank you, Madeline.
Well,
Devon.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. You know, it's like to Mel's point, like what is micro and macro art, right? Like is macro the gallery and selling paintings for millions of dollars? I honestly don't think that has a big influence on society at all. But the micro action rather of giving a kid or someone in jail or someone who's never had access to art a pen and saying, draw something, go crazy. You know, here's how we make an abstract painting together. That's a very powerful action on a micro scale that can have a big impact over the course of someone's life.
But maybe the macro is, okay, we need to get out of our community.
well,
How do we use art to bring in people who may not be accessing it through just the information that we're verbally giving them? How do we use art to bring people to create that will that we need to pressure the officials to take the action that we know we need to take? So I think that could be the macro. And then the micro is what you're talking about, giving young people the tool of art for self-expression, to raise their voice, to empower them, to help them with critical thinking. But the macro is then how do we now take that and wield it and utilize it in part of a broader movement around environmental injustice, for example, and racial inequality?
Well, I'll use the case about Flint Fit, you know, where Tracy Reese worked with me and all these companies work together. And you know, if you want to talk about micro, that would be small. What we did was we went to Flint and we asked permission for the people. I said, I got this company will take your bottles that you have to drink out of because of your situation and turn them into fabric. And Tracy can do designs and we'll sew them up here in Flint and create a possibility. And why we did that is because when S.O.U.R.C.E got there, it's almost like they were saying, what the hell could you bring to us? We live in this. What can you teach us about living in lead? We are being poisoned. We are so tired. So listening to people and saying, oh, okay, I want to listen to that. Can I create something or work with you with your permission, do something that might give you hope, that might give you employment? It's a small scale thing, but at least do something that can generate even those that are fighting the hardest to survive under the worst conditions a chance at something else in their lives other than the daily struggle that they have to contend with, and give them a piece of hope. I'm happy to report that, you know, I'm no longer part of the Flint Fit there, but Tracy Reese has hired that whole basketball court people. They're sewing stuff for her new fashion line now. So yeah, that's micro. Maybe it's microbial. I don't know, but that's what I believe in, that you can do that. And if you look at that kind of microbial level, infecting possibilities, to rethink it not as a direct course, it could be a small thing that's different from others, that it can create the positive infection or insertion that we need.
Well, Mel, thank you so much. And you actually had the last word. I'm being told we need to wrap up. But I want to just thank you all so much for the work that you're doing on the ground, which is so critical to the priorities of the Kerner Commission in terms of ending racial inequality, racial injustice, and poverty. Cheryl, you know, our hat is off to you, and a standing ovation for the tremendous difference you're making in the lives of everyday people on a daily basis, and for your commitment and dedication. And Devon, for empowering the voices of young people. That is so important. And Mel, for changing the world with your artistic vision. We really very much appreciate all of you. Thank you again to Expo Chicago, and of course to the Mellon Foundation. I'm Leila McDowell with the Eisenhower Foundation. And Alan, I'm assuming you're with us. We just don't see you. Thank you so much for those very insightful remarks. That was very, very helpful for all of us. So we appreciate you joining us today. And again, thank you, and continue to fight for justice, peace, and an end to poverty. Have a good evening, everyone.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And love.
And love. Love is the fundamental quality that we all need, because out of love, comes everything else. Love for the people, everything. So yes, love. Thank you all.